Hey there. Welcome to First Look. I think this is the first time I've been in my office for First Look in a while. So nothing has really changed. I continue to get older and whatever, but other than that, I'm okay. This is a glasses day. I love that I give you updates like one, you can't decipher that for yourself, or two, that you care. I can't figure out why I keep doing it, and yet I do. And so that's just where we are. Um, it's instant coffee today, which I got to tell you, I am I'm getting used to, which I think is not maybe a good thing, that I'm getting used to instant coffee, because it's going to make me even lazier than I am. I'm having one of those days where you think to yourself, like, ministry is one of those things that is, we talk about it as a lifestyle very intentionally, because there isn't anything about it that is normal at all. And it's like, sometimes it's very people driven, as you would imagine. You know, some people have things that they need, or situations, or whatever. Sometimes it feels very typical. You know, you have a funeral, you write liturgy for the coming Sunday, you field emails and phone calls and talk with new members or whatever. Like, all that seems like that's what pastors do. But then you have days where you're kind of running around trying to figure out, how can I be helpful with a roof issue, and who do I need to get keys from to get into this room or that room, and you're just kind of, it's like, that's just as much a part of the gig, right? But it's the variety, which I think is fantastic and interesting and odd, and it's never the same. And the great thing about it is that it leaves me, kind of predictably or unpredictably, just figuring out as I go, which is just the day I'm having. But I'm pivoting back, and so this part of the day gets to be, I think, the part that you probably assume that I'm doing more often than not, which is reading scripture and talking to you about it, which is exactly what we're going to do today. And I get a chance to do that actually, I probably say this 100 times. This is one of my favorite stories. And it is for a very particular reason. And it honestly is the kind of story that keeps me wanting to do this. Despite a roof issue, or, the funerals, or the hard parts, or the weird parts, or the interesting parts, you get to this story and you think, yeah, that's gonna be it. That's it for me. So this is gonna be Matthew 21 through 16. And the other thing I want you to know is, as you're sort of pairing this passage, is that it's paired with one of the Jonah passages. And the Jonah passage, we read Jonah in pieces, but realistically, you should just read the whole thing of Jonah. Like, you should always just sort of be just in the whole book. But the Jonah passage that's tied with this one is Jonah 3, verse 10 through chapter 4, verse 11. So that's sort of the pivot into, he's left the fish, or he's leaving the fish. He's going to the city. The city repents, much to his chagrin, and he gets very upset about this whole thing that they accepted. And he sits out under the bush, and then the bush withers, and then he, is ungrateful to God, and the whole thing. And the story it's a fantastic story that you can't even imagine. Like, just the blessing that the Jonah story is in the Bible is so immense, because there isn't any part of it that isn't fantastic. Every single element, from the running away to the being swallowed by the fish and the storm, and then the bitterness of the fact that Nineveh says, we're sorry. And then he complains about the vine. That's the miracle I think, of Scripture is that somehow that story was written, that it was captured, it was written, and that it's so unbelievably relevant so many years later. I mean, what, 2,700 years later, I'm still like, yep, that's exactly who I am. That's exactly who I am. And the story, it couldn't be paired any more wonderfully than with the story that it has, because it leaves every single person who reads this story in Matthew 20 feeling basically the same way as Jonah. I mean, the people who prepare the lectionary honestly could not have done a better job than with these two, pairing these two stories. It's a 10 out of 10. I mean, it's just like a wonderful job. So all that, and the Jonah story, that's the one I'm going to be looking at for the midweek worship this evening. So if you want to come and hear that sermon, then please come and do so. But the story is just fantastic. All right. So this is, again, Matthew 20, verses 1 through 16. And it's Jesus describing the kingdom of heaven. So before we even do the story, just a reminder of what that means. Jesus is consistently trying to give the people, give the disciples, give anyone who's listening a sense of not only what will be, but what should be now. And it's something that's a societal kind of direction. Hey, this is how we should collectively think about each other. It's not just you individually, but this is how we should structure society. And it's a reflection of God's kingdom. If you want to know how to exist in the world, you need to do this. Think this way. And that's really what it is. It's more, this passage is more of a mindset, is more of an understanding of understanding exactly how we should exist in the world, and trying to follow that as closely as possible. And I think it's one of the hardest, most honest, and beautiful stories that if you want to describe to someone who didn't understand what is Christianity about, what is your faith about, what makes that which you do different than just trying to be a nice person, right? I mean, and that's what we deal with a lot of the time. I don't want to say deal with that. That's our challenge. That's our calling. Our vocation as people of faith is to be able to recognize, why is being in this community of God important? And, that question comes up a lot too. Why is it important to be a part of a community of faith? Because someone I was talking to yesterday was saying something like, well, people tell me that you can really live your faith out on your own, which obviously has elements of truth, but you are missing these huge parts of what it means to be in community, because we lose the empathy part, right? The moral thinking in a vacuum kind of stuff you can do. You can find grace, you can find forgiveness, you can work out your own salvation. You can do all those things, kind of in the privacy of your own home. But what people miss, by and large, is the fact that we are supposed to live this life out in the world. And if we are constantly assuming, I'll take care of me if you take care of you, you take care of your your house and I'll take care of my house, then that leaves us judging the way you conduct yourself, but not really wanting to be engaged with it. Like, I care what you do, and I think that you should do X, Y, or Z. I'm going to judge you for not doing X, Y, or Z. I might even want you to follow certain laws or rules based on what I think or feel. But I'm not really going to help you, engage with you, care about you intimately. I'm just going to leave you over there and judge you from a distance. Because we set up these little silos of, our own thinking, when we were always meant to be those who reached out and who not only, told people the way they should be living their lives, but listened to them so that we know how to live our own lives, and that we are engaged with that constantly. And I think this story makes us feel uncomfortable in all the ways that, as a pastor, you are really excited about, because the faith should agitate the norm. It's like adding a drop of, baking soda to something and watching it bubble. It's like, it should agitate. It should change the fabric of something. And if it's not, then it's not even a philosophy. It's just like some guiding principles, like some tenets that I can leave or pick up or put down whenever I want to. So that's why I think this passage is so interesting. So let me give you the passage with all that lead up. Matthew 21 through 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. And after agreeing with the laborers for a denarius for the day, meaning that would be their pay, he sent them into the vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. And when he went out again after noon and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" And they said to him, "Well, because no one has hired us." And he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." And when the evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to the manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." And when those hired at about 5 o'clock came, each one received a denarius. Now when the first came, they thought that they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And when they had received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have been borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to the last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. And I called this sermon the point of grace. I love this story because it agitates people. It agitates me. I mean, it's not like I'm above it or like, oh, well, I've got it figured out or whatever. That's not what I mean. I just mean that like you read it and people are like, oh man, this one gets under my skin. And the fact that it gets under our skin says so much about us. And it's so much about the way that we understand life and the world to work, especially grace. And it says a lot about the way that we understand God being gracious to me, and me, living that grace out and trying to live with it in mind, and then also seeing, seeing other people maybe not do that, not at least not in the same way that I'm doing it. And then also then recognizing the grace that is there for other people. And all along the while, I'm taking stock and I'm figuring out who has earned what. Because I went to church and I did this and the fact that those kind of things can feel unjust or unfair, or that I have done all this work or lived this life when I would have rather have lived life some other way, is interesting. Because there's the part of the story that we don't really consider. We don't really consider the people who were hired close to the end of the day, which I thought was interesting, and I wanted to talk about for a second. Because the story doesn't say that the people who were hired last were just sitting at home watching Netflix, or playing something or enjoying themselves. They were out to brunch and they just decided to show up. Like they were having this wonderful time. Like they were at the park all day, and then at 5 o'clock they decided, I should probably see if I can get some work today. They were sitting in the marketplace waiting to be hired. Now, if you're in that situation, if you don't work, you don't eat. Is my guess. Because that amount of money, my understanding is that it's considered a day's wage, but it's not like some huge amount of money. It's not like it's still enough to get by. And so you have kind of a situation where you have people who are just trying to get by, who are standing and waiting anxiously to see if they're going to be able to do that. And so the people who are there in the marketplace, who are waiting to be hired, there's a certain level of anxiety. There's a certain level of worry. Maybe they had kids, or maybe they are just by themselves or whatever. Am I going to be able to make it? If I don't get hired today, it's on some level for some amount of money. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, do what I need to do. It's not like they were just, kicking back and like not worried about it. They weren't hired yet. They are unemployed, and they needed to be employed. They're in the marketplace waiting for work because that's the way they found work. And so it's not like they had all these backups. I mean, they were in a bad place, because think about it. They're still waiting for the possibility of working until the last hour, and they wouldn't have had any expectation that at that point that they would have gotten a full day's wage. They would have maybe gotten a little bit, and they were willing to wait all day, to half the day, till 3/4 of the day, till near the end of the day, just for the chance of doing that. Like we kind of treat it like they were on vacation, when they're sitting there anxious, worried. If you've ever been unemployed, or didn't know where your next meal was coming from, or didn't know how you would pay a bill, or didn't know how you would pay the rent, or didn't, then like you can probably identify with that feeling that like, I don't know how this is going to work, and I don't have any safety net. And if I don't come up with something, then other people in my life will suffer, or I will suffer. And none of that gets taken into consideration at all in the story. We just kind of treat it like, well, that's not fair. And the part of this that I hadn't really thought about until I read it this morning was that the people who get hired early in the morning don't have to go through that. Like, they're going to work all day and get the money that they need, and they avoid all of that anxiety. They avoid all of that like tension. They're not existing in that. You know, they got hired. They're relieved. I mean, you know what that's like. I would imagine that, you know, yeah, I got to work all day, but at least I don't have to worry. My kids will be okay. I'll be fine. I will eat today. I don't have to worry about today. Today is taken care of. I'll worry about tomorrow. That's the part of the story that I think we overlook, is that in addition to the people who were taken care of not recognizing the kind of the grace of that, they also didn't recognize the blessings of being people who don't have to live in that anxiety. I think far too often when we read this story, we read it like they're freeloaders, you know, who are just like, you didn't do anything to earn this, and I earned it, and why didn't you earn it? When in reality, they were going through their own type of suffering. And where you were working all day, not anxious, you know, just, I'm going to collect these wages. I'm going to work all day in this vineyard, and I'm going to take my wages and go home. They weren't sure if they were going to get that. And we kind of treat it like the story, like the people who weren't working all day had the better day. But I can certainly tell you, as someone who thankfully has almost always had a job, but I've had little points in there where I didn't, or we were kind of filling a gap, or, you know, like one job doesn't always fit to the other, and sometimes, you know, you're trying to figure things out. You know, the last thing you want to do is be sitting on your hands, not knowing how to help your situation out. Like, I mean, that kind of anxiety is way worse than getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and putting in a full day. It's way worse. At least that's my way of thinking about it. These weren't people who were lazy. They experienced a different type of hardship. I'm sure vineyard work is not easy work. But it also, when you pick up, you know, the tools to do that work, you're putting down the anxiety and the stress of maybe not being able to eat at the end of the day, or maybe your kids not being able to eat at the end of the day. And that part of the story, I think, is gets a little bit lost. And I don't know if that's going to be my ultimate point in the story, but it is the part that I think I don't hear whenever I hear this sermon preached. And I think that's an interesting thought to kind of mull over, because one of the things I think that it's interesting is that this story gets treated like, why did I spend all that time in church when I could have been doing what? Like, what do you wish you were doing? And whatever that is, whatever your answer is, whatever you wish you were doing, instead of like actively pursuing your faith, because you can't earn it anyway. But I think what usually we talk about is that, like, I wouldn't have, if I could somehow just live my life the way I wanted to, and then at the end just pick up a phone and say, you know, Jesus save me, like these people did, then I would do that. But that's not the way the story is told. That's not what the laborers are doing all day. And so it reframes, when you think about it that way, it kind of reframes who has the better path, who has the better day. And I think part of the way we hope that our life of faith and church and the things that we do is that your life is better because you engage in that community. And that's why it starts off with, the kingdom of God is like this. Not that faith is like this or salvation is like this, but that community together is like this, and that it should be enriching, and it should be you should be able to share the load, and it should give you some level of peace and sanctuary, right? Like those people who were working all day had some level of like mental, emotional peace and security, and that the community in which we build here should also provide some of that for us. We should be doing that for each other, and that's what you hope to experience in this life of faith, is that life would be better because you are a part of this community, this kingdom. And that's I think what we miss, is that you're not missing out on something by not being one of the laborers. The people who are waiting in the marketplace are those are the people that are missing out, because they're sitting in this anxiety and this wondering and this lack of fulfillment, I guess you could say. And that's the part of the story that I really want to explore, that I think is interesting. So that's my take on it. Again, I don't know if I'm going to run with that or not, but you can think about that when it comes to the Jonah story. You can think about that when it comes to your week, in the way that you've traditionally heard this story be sermonized. But that's my thought for today. All right, well, that's what I got. That's my first look. Thank you for exploring this story with me. Thanks for being here in my office for the first time in a while. And I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope you can join us this evening. And otherwise, I will see you next time for another first look. So take care.